Hi, welcome everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Great to see some Yankee chapter members coming in now. Give us just one moment to let everyone get settled, and then we'll go ahead and start. Well, welcome. Thank you all for being here. I'm Laura Simoes, the Executive Director of the Naki S. Loeb School of Communications. I'm also a proud former president and board leader of the Yankee chapter of the Public Relations Society of America, so I'm excited to be with all of you today. For those of you who might be new to the Loeb School, we're a 20-year-old nonprofit that was established with a mission to promote and defend the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, as well as to foster interest, integrity, and excellence in journalism and all forms of communication. And we do this by offering classes and workshops to educate students of all ages. And this spring, we'll be offering 8 brand new free communications classes and 2 all-new writing workshops. These are in April and May. You can learn more about those at our website, loebschool.org. That's L-O-E-B school.org. And I'm going to turn the program over now to Seth Wheeler, who will introduce you to your panelists. But I want to say thank you again for joining us and welcome. Seth, go right ahead.
That's much better. Thank you, Laura. And thank you to the Naki Loeb School. You guys have been great friends of the chapter, and we're glad that the humble proceeds of this morning's event will benefit the school and its programs. Before we get started, let me put in a quick plug for the Yankee chapter. For all the non-members or guests that may be joining us today, thank you and welcome. The Yankee chapter is a happy little band of about 100 professional communicators from New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont. And I think I can speak on behalf of the chapter's membership when I say that it's been a real professional lifeline for many of us. You know, so many of us work in these small sort of 1, 2, 3 person departments. Some of us work alone, others have gone into business for themselves. We wear a lot of hats. It seems like there's never enough time. And so the Yankee chapter is a great opportunity to sort of commiserate, collaborate, and also have a lot of fun. We can't wait for this pandemic to be over because our best times are honestly with one hand on a beer glass and the other shaking a hand. So we can't wait to get back in person. We encourage you, if you're interested, to please check out our website at yankeeprsa.org, or feel free to contact me directly or any member of the board directly. So that said, let's meet our brave working panelists or panelists of working journalists today who have graciously agreed to join us. David Sakowich, welcome. David is the news assignment manager at WMUR-TV, a Hearst television station in Manchester. Since 2004, David has coordinated daily news coverage along with special reports, first in the nation primary political coverage and other station events. Prior to joining WMUR-TV, David was an assignment editor at WHDH-TV in Boston from 2001 to 2004. David also worked as a news anchor and reporter for Comcast in Lowell, Massachusetts. Since working at MUR, David and the news team have won several regional and national Edward R. Murrow Awards for news political coverage and the station's State of Addiction campaign. David is also an Emmy-nominated journalist. David Brooks, welcome, the second part of our David and David team. David is a Concord Monitor reporter and the writer of the science and technology column Granite Geek, as well as the blog granitegeek.org. He's also a moderator of the monthly Science Cafe Concord events. After obtaining a bachelor's degree in mathematics, David naturally became a newspaperman, working in Virginia and Tennessee before spending 28 years at the Nashua Telegraph. He joined the Monitor in 2015. Unfortunately, we were going to have a third member of our panel today, Hannah McCarthy from New Hampshire Public Radio, but she was unable to join us today unfortunate, but I know that these two Davids here will more than pick up the slack. So welcome, David and David. Thanks so much again for being with us. I know this is one of our more popular events of the year because it's a great source of information, hands-on stuff that we can all use to do our jobs better. So one note before we start, I want to ask for everyone's indulgence out there as we attempt to hold a dynamic discussion on a platform that doesn't always allow for that. I'm going to do my best to direct questions to specific panelists by name. I'm also going to keep an eye on your mute status. If I see you come off mute, I'll call on you to speak. Failing that, you can gesticulate madly and I'll try to catch you. So we'll see how things go. The goal is really to get as free a discussion going as we can without stepping all over each other. So let's get going. I think you can probably guess what the first topic of discussion is going to be. It's been the issue that's consumed all of us for the past year and really changed the way we all live, work, and think, honestly. And I'm talking, of course, about Tom Brady's departure from the Patriots. I know it's been tough, and there's light at the end of the tunnel, though. We should just hang in there. Actually, of course not. It's COVID. The pandemic is the big story. So David Sakowich, you are a TV news assignment manager. I imagine the pandemic has thrown a whole new set of challenges at you. Tell us what the impact has been and how you and the station have adapted.
Sure. Thanks, Seth, and thank you, Laura, for the invite today. I noticed a lot of the attendees today are people that I work with on a regular basis, so I look forward to any of the questions that they have today. But yes, I mean, COVID completely changed the way we cover news. Last March, we had to learn how to do news and cover it differently. We're an in-person news gathering operation. We go to people and do in-person interviews. We shoot video in person. That completely changed. Our anchor teams last March were separated. We broke them up and we did this to keep our staff safe. Some of those anchors, as you probably saw, worked from home for several months. Our reporters moved out of the newsroom. On several days during the week, it was just me and maybe one or two others in the newsroom, as opposed to the 25 or 30 producers and reporters and anchors and videographers who work in the newsroom on a daily basis. We ended up renting trailers that we put in our parking lot for our photographers to work out of. We began doing our interviews all by Zoom last March, and that really hasn't changed up until recently. We have started to do a bit more in-person interviews. I had to train all of our reporters and our anchors to use this new technology. Some of them had never used them before. Some have used Skype before, but we really needed a platform that worked for us, and Zoom was that platform. We've slowly returned to doing in-person interviews. However, we do have some guidelines in place. All of those interviews have to be outdoors. We don't do any interviews indoors. There are a few exceptions to that. We are masked, socially distanced when we do those in-person interviews. We are still not covering any indoor events. It's a challenge. A lot of events have started to become back indoors. However, there are some exceptions, like the governor's weekly press conference or other events where we know there are a limited amount of people in the space. And the space is, pretty large. I mean, the goal of all of this was to keep our staff and anyone we came in contact with safe. And it worked. We had very few COVID-related issues. Most of our anchor teams are back together. We still limit the number of staff that are in the building. And I don't expect that to return to anything close to normal. And for several more months, we continue on a weekly basis to look at the state's COVID cases. They're going down, which is a great sign, but we don't want to rush into anything. So at this point, it's continuing to do what we've been doing since last March. And, it's worked well. I mean, it was a challenge in the beginning to try to figure this out. But I don't think our news coverage hurt by any means by pivoting to the way that we started to cover news.
Thank you, David. That's great. And before I ask David Brooks the same question, I wanted to remind our participants today of the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We do want to spend the majority of our time today taking your questions for our panelists. So if you do have questions that you think of along the way, use the Q&A button at the bottom to enter it in, and we'll try to get to those after I ask a few initial questions here. David Brooks, to you, how has your job changed? I know you're not out there working a city beat at the Telegraph anymore, but has the pandemic been a challenge for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Not quite as much as for television. Obviously, they've really had to change things a lot. But I've been working at home. I'm actually in the office today for the first time in 6 months. Very exciting. But I've been working from home and doing pretty much all my interviews over the phone or over Zoom. And the one person in the newsroom who's out all the time is Jeff Forrest, who is our chief photographer. Oh, you can't really take pictures mostly. So it has affected, actually, one thing it has done indirectly is, to be perfectly honest, made press officials more important, because it's harder for me to stumble on a story because I'm not wandering around the community. And therefore, I'm more dependent on information being sent to me. So that's it. Actually, I hadn't really thought about that until you were asking about it, but that's the truth. Press releases and that sort of thing are actually more important than they were a year ago.
Well, it's interesting because that kind of leads me into my next question. I think in some ways it's reduced the access to news that you have to work harder to get it. But on the other hand, it seems like the pandemic has been a virtually inexhaustible source of stories. But David Sakowich, do you run the risk of too much COVID news? Are you mindful of keeping a balance? Unmute, Dave.
How's that? Better?
Much better.
All right, great. Sure. I mean, yes, that is certainly a factor, especially within the last few weeks and couple of months. We've seen COVID fatigue out there. People after that 1 year mark, a lot of people were tired of wearing masks and they wanted to go back to restaurants. And we're certainly mindful of that with our coverage as well. This past year has proven more than ever just how important, New Hampshire media is, and that's television, that's newspaper, that's radio. Our online dominance has been unbelievable. Our ratings, as you can imagine, people have been watching and have been reading. They want to know what's happening in terms of COVID in this state. We are still very dominant every day with our COVID coverage, especially now that the vaccine process is here. Everybody wants, a lot of people, most people want to get a vaccine. They want to know how they can get it, when they can get it. That's the kind of information that we're trying to put out there now. We've also done a lot of coverage recently about college COVID spikes. We've been seeing some of those instances in some college campuses where COVID cases have been increasing. We try to find news that we think people on the COVID front are most interested in every day. But we have been introducing more and more of our regular daily news coverage as well to try to balance things out. And we've really tried to put a lot of emphasis on the good that has been happening in communities. And that has been the case since last March, when we saw people just step up and start sewing masks and doing everything they could to help with this COVID crisis. And really the good news is really a big part of what we've been more mindful of more than ever now, because the news has been dark and depressing for the past year, and it impacts us as well. We realize that. And so we try to make sure that we do a good balance of news every day, that we're still doing that local non-COVID coverage, the national coverage. The national news events of this country over the past year have been unbelievable. And people are still looking for that coverage as well. So we really try to strive and make sure that we maintain that we have a good balance of news every day.
David Brooks, has the pandemic opened any new story opportunities for you? New lines of inquiry?
New lines of inquiry. Well, everything is seen through a COVID lens, and as David said, there's a burnout, and so you kind of got into it. You got to be careful about that. I joke, and it's not really a joke, is that the only two business stories I've done over the last year have been, this business was destroyed by COVID, or this business has gone through the roof because of COVID, but they can't take advantage of it because the supply chains are all screwed up. So, I mean, and after a while, people get tired of reading those two stories, even though they're still legitimate. Probably the most, for me personally, for the monitor, the thing that the most obvious one is we do about 6 months ago, we call it the COVID tracker. On Mondays, I run it. Because back in the summer, you remember there were all these numbers coming and it wasn't really clear how bad it was getting. Was it getting bad? People were confused. And so this was like a week I say, I look at numbers and I say, here's what the numbers said last week about how it's doing. It's doing better, it's doing worse. And the reader response was staggering. Partly because newspaper readership tends to be a little older, and obviously the people like me are the demographic that was being hit the most. So, and that's still running, and it's kind of getting hard to think of something new to say every week in it, but it's people are still responding to it. So that's a really obvious example of a COVID thing. I mean, and things like the press conferences that WMUR runs, which I bet are just ratings go through the roof on those online, I bet, when you run those. That's it. But every story you approach it, okay, what is COVID part of this? How important is it? And do I need to mention that? Town meeting story. You can't get more basic New Hampshire than town meeting, but every single one of them has been thrown up in the air because of COVID. So
it's dominating it takes all the air out of the atmosphere. We could probably devote all of today's event to COVID related issues, but as my sore arm reminds me here, I got my shot 2 days ago. There will be life after COVID, right? And there's always going to be a need for PR professionals to create relationships with journalists. And to that end, David Brooks, tell us what kind of businesses and people you want to hear from, and how can we interest you in our company's news? I know your particular bent is science and technology.
So a lot of what I'm going to say here is really incredibly obvious, and I apologize. But what matters for you guys is who are you pitching it to? If you're making the same pitch to me as you are to David MUR, you're not doing it right, because boy, they are a whole different kettle of fish than I am. So we're like a small regional newspaper, the Monitor. So we're one of the dominant news sources in the Concord area. So that means if you're a business in, Dover, I probably don't care as a Concord Monitor newspaper report, unless you think of some geographic angle that can fit into the greater Concord area. There's a lot of businesses in Concord that need to be written about too. So even if you're a really interesting business in Dover, pitching it to the Monitor is not going to make sense as compared to pitching to the.
Will you make an exception for that on your blog? Are you more statewide in your blog?
Yes, that's part of the complication that your industry has changed at least as much as mine has. Is that if you're pitching to, the Concord Monitor newspaper, and the website, which is basically the newspaper online, that's one thing. But if you're pitching to Granite Geek, granitegeek.org, which is a science tech, so I write stuff all over actually Maine, Vermont, and to a certain extent Massachusetts as well, if it's intriguing technically. So I just wrote about a solar farm and a blueberry farm in Maine because it's an interesting example of agrivoltaics. So that's different. So you'd be pitching, same human being, but with different hats.
Yeah.
And so that requires some sort of background prep on your point.
David Sakowich, you command probably the most valuable commodity in New Hampshire news, which is airtime on WMUR. How often are you being pitched by communications people, and what in your mind separates a good pitch from a bad pitch? Mute. Got to unmute, David.
There we go. Sorry. It called in on my phone because my computer's not working, so I'm muting in two places. So sorry about that. I get pitched every day, as you can imagine. We're a statewide news outlet. We cover every corner of the state from top to bottom, east to west. Our station penetrates portions of Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine. We get hundreds of emails a day. I get 500 emails a day in my inbox A lot of them are junk, quite honestly. They're more from national media PR agencies. We're more interested in the local news angles to that. Since we're statewide, we cover, a variety of topics. I mean, we cover everything from health to science to everyday news. So I'm always looking for that pitch. And as you can imagine, there's only so much airtime every day. We only have so many reporters. On a daily basis, we generally have, at a minimum, 4 reporters who cover our 5 and 6 o'clock newscasts. And then we have another 3 reporters, 2 or 3 reporters who work for our 10 and 11 o'clock newscasts. So we have a minimum amount of news that we can cover statewide with a reporter. So we're always looking for those stories that, one, have a statewide appeal. We're also looking for stories that are honestly unique. And there's no better story than a personal story, when you can put a personal face to a story that is important across the state. Obviously, some of the things that have been huge in recent weeks is school stories, only because of the governor's mandate to return back to in-person learning. A lot of schools across the state have done some really unique things. So we're always looking for those types of stories. Good pitch versus a bad pitch. You got to remember that we're a very visual medium. So we need, one, video and pictures to support a story, and 2, people to talk about it. We'll get pitches every day from people who have a great story, and then we say, well, we want to set up an interview with you. Oh, no, we don't want to do that. Well, then you're pitching the wrong people, because we need to talk to people. We need that, we need that sound to go with our stories. So think video, pictures, and photos, and think, who can make this story, sing, who can really explain this story well. And you always want to put those best people to us so we can tell that story in a good way.
Do you find the camera is often the biggest impediment itself? It kind of just sucks the air out of the room sometimes when somebody who
sometimes it does.
But
sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you want me to, I have to be on TV. This isn't the newspaper. We get that all the time. I don't, it's funny how people think like that. But yeah, sure. People think, I don't know if I want to put myself in front of a camera, it's a matter of making people feel comfortable and not realizing the camera's even there, that you're just talking to someone. And once you can get past that, people think, that's a piece of cake. The other part is, we never make people look bad. Just that's the beauty of editing. You can do an interview and think you stumble through it. We're not going to put that on TV. We're going to make you look good. I don't think I've ever had a complaint from someone saying we've made them look bad. But yeah, the camera can be challenging sometimes.
Good point. All right, let's ask some nuts and bolts questions right now here. We had touched on this briefly, but we'll call this the speed round here. So typically when we have news to share, we write a press release, we send it out into the world with the hopes that it will find someone to take it in and maybe use it. But what can we do to better the chances that our release stands out or our communication stands out from the rest? As you mentioned, David Sakowich, you get hundreds of pitches. From what day to send it, what time of day? Do you want to receive it as an email attachment? Do you want to paste it in the body of the email? What about photo credits, David Brooks? That kind of thing. So I'll put it first out to David Sakowich. If I want to stand out in your email inbox, should I first off reference that it's local, it's New Hampshire based? That's a good start.
Sure, that's a great start. And, the other thing is don't send me an email about an event that's happening in a month from now or 2 months from now. I think a good heads up is a week before or a couple of days before. Quite honestly, we work day to day. Yeah, most of our stories we decide on that day. because we never know what is happening in this state on a particular day. If you have an event set up for a particular day, I'm going to tell you if you send me an email that I'm not going to be able to tell you if we're going to be able to attend that event until probably that morning. But yes, emails are the best way to communicate with us. Always send a press release. It doesn't, please don't make it 2 or 3 pages long. We're not going to get through that. Your key points should be in the first couple of paragraphs. I prefer attachments. And if there is some sort of photo or photos to include in that press release, if you're not pitching an event that's coming up, if you're pitching something that has happened already that you want the community to know about, we need visuals with that. So please include, any photos that you may have. Please, send, you can call me too to follow up. Probably the day before. If you have an event you want me to cover, always check in with me the day before. You can either give me a call or you can shoot me an email. But attachments are great. It can be in the body of the email. Honestly, it doesn't matter to me. Photos are great. Do it not months before, do it a week before, a couple of days before, follow up. Tell me who's going to be at your event. And you know what? Quite honestly, people think a selling point for an event is that the governor's going to be there or the mayor's going to be there. That's great, but that doesn't make a final decision for me. We tend to be more concerned about the people that are intimately involved with whatever you're pitching, rather than a governor or an elected official.
Dave Brooks, do you want to add to that? You want to?
Oh, I could talk about this for hours. So by the way, that last comment about the governor, I had an editor, because you're right. Everybody says, hey, you got to come cover this. The governor's going to be there. And his response was, the governor is somewhere every day. And that's true. So, so let me start. So email is still the preferred method. However, having said that, in today's environment, you should also have a Twitter account. Twitter is the one social media outlet that is used by professional journalists the most. Basically, you should have your own Twitter account. You should follow any reporters that you hope will someday, cover your stuff, because that sets up some sort of Twitter algorithm thing. And you should put all your press releases on Twitter as well. You may need to edit them down, or you will need to edit them down. But that should be, and frankly, you should have a Facebook presence as well. The same reason. On Facebook, you can put the entire thing, you can put a bunch of extra art, people can download it from there. So all 3 of those should be automatic. Email, Twitter, and Facebook should be automatic. Things like Instagram and the like, you may need to ask younger people than me about that.
Yeah.
So obvious stuff. Email subject line. The subject line should be short. It should say why your story is interesting and unique. Quantified, objective information is better. I mean, I know your boss really wants to lead the press release with his quote saying, we're the best company in New Hampshire, but that's not gonna get coverage. Whereas if you can lead with information about, Jones LLC has bought Smith LLC for X dollars and this many employees, and then you can have your boss's quotes about what happened. That's the information. Photos, I do not embed them. If you are sending to a newsprint organization, newsprint is an unforgiving medium. We need very high quality photos in order to be printable. You should have a high res attachment. And then here's the one thing that all editors told me I have to emphasize today. Photos need cut lines. They need captions. Sorry, cut lines is the newspaper live. So do not send a photo unless you have in the body of the text, not as metadata, but who, what, where, and when. Who's in the photo? Make sure they're easily identifiable. You can say which one's wearing the weird red sweater, like Seth there or something, if you want to make sure we know who's who. When was it taken? Where was it taken? If we don't have that, the photo's not going to run. It doesn't matter how cool it is if it's got a neat sunset in it. So, writing captions is the hardest part of newspapers, and it's not any easier for you guys. But make sure there's all the information about the caption, about the photo is included with the body of your release. That will help a lot.
All good points. So last question before we start taking our audience questions. There's a lot of information available on the internet and from other sources. So, and a lot of times a journalist these days doesn't really need to leave their computer screen sometimes, but what role does a PR communications person play in your job really? You know, we often think of our roles as creators and just distributors of news, but our work experience and our industry knowledge is also an asset. How can we leverage that with you? For example, being quoted as an expert. I'm in the electric business, so if I get quoted as an expert in your story, your story gets more depth and understanding, while it's good for my company's reputation to be identified as a so-called expert. Do you see value in developing those kind of relationships? I would take that to Dave Brooks first.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. I mean, you have two roles. One of your roles is to get the information that your employer wants, you know, get it distributed as widely as possible. But the other one is to help the world understand the industry that you're in. And if you have a relationship with a reporter or an editor, I'm as you know, somebody I can call, ask for background, context. That's really valuable. It will make me pay more attention. If Seth sends me something, I know it's less likely to be baloney than if somebody I've never contacted before sends me something. So it actually, it helps you and makes, and plus it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. Dave Sakowich, do you have regular contact with PR people?
Sure. I mean, I look to PR people regularly, and a lot of times is when we're doing a story, let's say on solar, I may need, or broadband. Let's take broadband for instance. There could be a national story on broadband. There could be a local story on broadband. I think, all right, who has a connection to broadband? What PR firm may have some expertise in broadband? Who can we call up to get information about, for example, how is broadband working in New Hampshire? How is it expanding in New Hampshire? Because it is certainly a timely topic over the past year. Who can we interview who can talk about how important broadband is? So I look to PR firms who have expertise in certain areas that we can connect with to talk to us and talk to our viewers about that topic. And the same goes for national stories too. There could be a big national story happening, and we always look to how can we localize this, how we can make this New Hampshire specific. So I look to PR firms to sort of help with that, especially ones that I know that may have experts in a particular area. And I always encourage PR firms, if there is a big national story that may be happening and you think you have an expert that may be able to make that New Hampshire specific, always reach out to me, because we're always looking for that type of New Hampshire person that can localize it for our viewers.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, what David just said is absolutely correct. I get pitches all the time from national people say, we have an expert who can talk about, migrants at the border. He's a professor at the University of Chicago. Do you want to talk to him? And the answer is no. I very seldom get, so I'm trying to think of a specific example. So for example, like when AMC Theaters decides to reopen or Cinemagic shuts down, if you have a client who is an independent movie theater who either is or isn't open, you can say, hey, you got reporters, you can say, hey, I've got a local guy who's involved in the industry. There's a national story about it. Do you want to maybe talk to him? That's a way to do it. So you have to kind of think of what the angle might be that isn't necessarily already being covered.
Okay, thanks, guys. That's great. We are starting to get some questions rolling in here, Laura. I'm just going to start asking these questions right here. A question came in earlier about our nuts and bolts section, and a question. What about third-party email providers, MailChimp, Constant Contact with links to downloadable high-res images? Is that okay for you, Dave Sakowich? You take that, that's fine, not a problem.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, we accept third party. I get a lot of Dropbox stuff and WeTransfer and all those other third parties are fine for that, for us, yes.
Anything to add, Dave? You all set there? Dave Brooks.
The only thing I would say is be careful when you do that, because I got an email yesterday that said, hi, square bracket, insert name here, square bracket. Make sure you don't send that.
Let's go the extra mile and put the name in. James Samoas chimes in with a very general question. What is the future of news as the world changes around us? Good luck. Anyone?
Again, I could talk for hours and my wife would get up and leave the room because she's so sick of hearing about it. That's part of why your guys' jobs has gotten so much more complicated. I mean, it used to be we were pretty much the only megaphone in town, right? And you just had to get us to be your megaphone. Now there's lots of things, and I assume all of you have at least half of your job is reaching directly to customers or directly to whoever your audience is, not through an intermediate like us. Again, that's where social media is a big deal, and the rules are still changing all the time. But for the time being, it's obviously being on MUR is going to do more than anything else you can do. NHPR is really the only other outlet that's kind of got almost an equivalent. But the local newspaper, people will, nobody cuts out a website and sticks it on the fridge, right? So if you can be in the newspaper, it's still a big deal. But it's shrinking. Anybody who's dealt with a monitor for a while knows that we're, quarter of the size we used to be in terms of the newsroom, as is every other media organization. And it makes it harder to deal with this sometimes because you don't have a dedicated report.
Dave Brooks, perfect time for another question on that same note. Will the monitor ever drop the news wall to get a bigger reach, its paywall?
So that's a little above my pay grade, but then I've been, I was here originally. I once had 5 different email addresses at the Telegraph because it was so early, pre-web. Everybody had their own little item. And there's been a debate the whole time: is it better to be free with a big audience or a paywall where you can get more money from each individual reader? Basically, there's not enough advertising dollars online to support a small or regional publication based strictly on eyeballs, is my belief. This is just me personally. So my guess would be no, we will not drop a paywall. We just have to get more dollars from each reader to keep a functioning newsroom, because there just aren't quite enough readers in the greater Concord area to support what you think of a newsroom needs to be. You just can't depend on sort of these extra. The phrase is that we traded print dollars for online dimes, and those are being traded for mobile pennies. Because trying to get advertising out of a phone is forget it. So I would suspect not, but that's personal guess.
David Sakowich, did you want to chime in on the prior question about the future of news?
Sure. I mean, I think television fares much better than newspapers. We know what the newspaper industry has been like the past couple of years, and it's really unfortunate. I think in TV news, we're okay. I mean, we've had to battle the loss of viewers over the past few years as more and more people go to social media, especially the younger demographic goes to social media to get their news and other online platforms. We have a really good online presence here in New Hampshire with our website, WMUR.com. It used to be you'd have to wait till the end of the day before we updated any news on that, but now it's a constant. It's constant throughout the day. We now have 4 full-time web staffers. So I'm feeding my web team information on breaking news throughout the day. They're immediately putting it on our website with information. I'm very active on Twitter, and we're pushing that information out. Our online dominance is pretty good. I mean, we're one of the most viewed, if not the most viewed media outlet online in the state. We know that, so we make sure that our website is updated constantly throughout the day. is, everybody has a smartphone now, so everybody's checking for news on a constant basis, especially over the past year with COVID. So I think TV news is, doing okay in terms of the future. We're not going away.
David Sakowich, do you know why a city the size of Manchester, New Hampshire, similar to the size of Portland, Maine, or Burlington, Vermont, whereas Portland, Maine has 3 local affiliates, Burlington has several as well. Why is it that New Hampshire has WMUR? Not that there's anything wrong with WMUR. I'm just curious why there's competition.
Sure. Yeah. So WMUR, here in New Hampshire, we're part of the Boston television market. So our station is directly competing with the Boston TV stations. The Boston TV stations not only cover Massachusetts, but they also cover at least southern and central New Hampshire. Not on a daily basis. They usually come up here and when there's some big breaking horrible news story, and then they go out the next day, and it's our responsibility, to keep on going. So those stations are technically our competitors, as opposed to Portland, Maine, where they're in their own television market, and those TV stations compete against one another. We did see a station here at WBIN a few years ago, started a news operation. It's really tough to start a TV news operation already in a state that has an established television station like us. They just couldn't get the viewers, and unfortunately, they closed. But I don't think you're going to see ever another television station attempt to start up here in New Hampshire. I mean, that's sort of way this TV market is built.
Yeah. Sticking with you here, David Sakowich, another question from an audience member. How connected are the Facebook editors to the WMUR news department? They seem to have differing agendas.
I don't know what that means. So I wish I had an example on what that, if that questioner can explain a little bit more. So something about our Facebook page is, one, we post our local stories to our Facebook page. These are the stories that we generate here in New Hampshire. We do not post national stories or international stories. They are posted by a national web desk on our behalf. We have no choice, usually, to not post something that, or remove something that they've posted. So while we post the local stories here in New Hampshire, there are other posts that are being posted on our behalf, and they're being posted on all the Hearst television sites across the country that may have a tie-in to a national story, a story from another state, an international story. So that's where those posts are coming from. They are not necessarily coming from our web team. So if you have an example, I'd like to hear it.
Like I said, I read them.
Yeah.
David Brooks, do you contribute content to the Concord Monitor's social media feeds?
Me personally, I actually have my own Twitter, which is Granite Geek. Sometimes but there's somebody else who handles the Monitor's Twitter feed, and they also handle the Facebook page. And the point of both of those is to, make you love us so much that you'll subscribe. We're not, the point of them is not that you'll have this entertaining Twitter feed. It's that, you'll realize the Monitor is valuable, and you'll go to the Monitor website or subscribe digitally or something, so we can get some money out of you, frankly. There's no money attached to either of those. They're an attempt to build audience. But Granite Geek on Twitter is me, just me, but the Concord Monitor is a monitor done by a couple of editors. Facebook.
Are you doing any general reporting for the Monitor, or is it you staying in your lane?
No, I do general reporting as well. Yeah. Frequently business, sometimes pick up some City Hall stuff, depending on who's around. Oh, yeah.
Laura, did you want to chime in? I just got a text from you. Do you want to?
Sure. I had a question, and as
Sure.
host, I'm not able to put it in the chat box in the Q&A. But I was wondering, since we celebrated Sunshine Week last week in New Hampshire, which is a national and local celebration of open government, I wondered how COVID has made it harder for your news outlets, reporters to cover open government activities like public meetings, or if it's made it harder for them to obtain records under the right to know law.
David Brooks, go ahead.
It's actually made it easier to cover meetings because they're all on Zoom right now.
Yeah.
And I hope it stays. I think it's terrific for public, and I'm even at the town level, particularly at the town level. Right? Who the heck goes down to town hall on a Monday night and sits through a selectmen's meeting? But if you can turn it on at home and sort of watch it while you're doing something else, I think it's great. And so it's actually made it easier for us in many ways to cover meetings. As far as FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, I don't know that it's really had an effect one way or the other. Sometimes it's an excuse. We can't get back to you. We can't get to you because we're not in the office right now. And that's not an excuse. That's a legitimate response. So I guess in that sense, it has complicated a bit. But in terms of Zoom, COVID's showing that public events happen online effectively. COVID's been great, and I hope it stays.
David Sakowich.
Yeah, I agree with what David said. I think it's made it easier for us because, we weren't necessarily able to go to a lot of, town selectmen's meetings or city council meetings on a regular basis, but Zoom has made that more accessible to us and allow us to give some not have been, or meetings that we might not have normally been able to get to. So it's been a huge help, and I hope it continues because I think it really does provide some greater access into seeing what towns are dealing with right now. In terms of 91A requests, I have filed a handful since the pandemic began. I really haven't run into many issues. I filed one regularly with the Attorney General's office about COVID guidance complaints that the state receives. And the turnaround time has been good. I've filed some 91A requests with some police departments for some information, and it's been the typical turnaround time. I have not seen a significant problem with any requests that I have filed in the past year. And that's good.
Thank you. I'll read this question too, and maybe Julie, if you want to amplify it if we're not quite clear on it, but thank you for all your intel today, she says to the panelists. Can you talk about travel coverage for those of us who represent large attractions and destinations in New England, but not necessarily New Hampshire based?
I guess I can answer that. Sure. I guess it depends what events or attractions that you may be talking about. We are in terms of our news coverage, we're very specific to New Hampshire. So that's what our focus is. However, I will say we do have our program called New Hampshire Chronicle that airs every night, where they tend to do more regional stories from time to time, focusing on the arts and attractions. So if there's something that you're interested in, you can certainly reach out to me, and I can certainly help you decide if that's something that could be for news, or it's something that I can connect you with a Chronicle producer on if you have something that may be of interest. I'm happy to do that.
Dave Brooks.
Yeah, that would be a tough one. So unless and particularly for the Monitor, obviously, unless there's some connection to something that's happening locally. So, if Acadia National Park stopped letting people in, and we could compare that to what they were doing at the White Mountain National Forest or something like that, or the Big E changed, and so you can connect that to county fairs in New Hampshire. So it had to be something like that, but the other thing, of course, you can do is you can buy a big ad in the newspaper, and that's always a very effective way.
Smooth. So yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Beth, I just wanted to add one other thing, is that if we're talking about New England attractions, we do have sister stations, Hearst television stations throughout New England that I could help connect you with as well. We have a television station in Portland, Maine. We have one in Burlington, Vermont, and we also have one, our WCVB in Boston. So if you needed some connections to any of those places.
Great. And Julie has clarified since we've been talking that Chronicle, she agrees, David, Chronicle is the way to go. She says, thank you. And it's for the King Richard's Fair.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Yeah. Let's see what else we got. Thanks, Julie. Clark Dumont has a comment. New Hampshire media is not just New Hampshire anymore. My wife and I tap into WMUR Daily, at WMUR Daily, at 3 p.m. Pacific time in Las Vegas. Stream NHPR and read the Concord Monitor. She was a paper girl, he writes, as well as the UL. New Hampshire Business Review, Laconia Daily Sun, and AP, Holly Raymer. He's worked and lived in a lot of cities. New Hampshire news is thriving, he says. Let's see. I think we've hit all of our questions. Go ahead, David Brooks.
Actually, a comment from what he just said there, because that's true. We have a lot of audience, and I'm sure MUR in particular has it, and HPR as well, that's outside the state. But the value we bring is from local coverage and local information. Because obviously everybody and their grandmother can give you something else and can pontificate about stuff. So if you're pitching us, the local angle is key, because that's what we do, and that's what matters from us. That's what matters to our audience. So really, really interesting stories that don't have a local angle probably aren't going to make it.
Kind of a tangential question here from Michelle, but what's the best way to broach the idea of a feature/human interest story that may not be super timely, but interesting to your audience beyond a press release?
Well, so talking about going online, one thing I do not get any of, and perhaps MUR does, you may well, is video press releases. There's no reason why you can't have a quick is key, little video. If you've got somebody who's really interesting, not timely, not an obvious news hook, sending a press release saying so-and-so has written this fascinating book, but perhaps a video is the way to do it. It's got to be quick though. It's got to be short, and it's got to be a link that you can click on. But that might be an outlet that.
Great idea. I like that. David Sakowich.
Sure. I mean, I get pitched every day for stories that are not necessarily timely, and I hold on to them because, sometimes we have slow news days. It doesn't happen very often, but if it's a feature or a person story, we're always looking to try to balance out those our news day and our newscast to include those types of stories. So I check a folder that I save every day and go into it in my email for these types of pitches, and we try to do as many as we can, especially if they're not timely, which is great because we can do them at any point. So if you have a pitch like that, always send it, and we do hold on to it, and we look at them regularly. So don't think we're ignoring them if it doesn't have a timestamp.
Dave Sakowich, we have a comment for you. Great job with the breaking news via Facebook Live. I watch the live news stream frequently from my desktop and enjoy seeing WMUR right on top of what's happening locally and nationally.
Thank you. And that, we realize that, especially in breaking news situations, that people want to know what's happening. And so we have the ability to use Facebook and Twitter to get that information out to people regularly. And we make it a priority. I mean, when something is happening in New Hampshire, we want to tell people about it. Obviously, sometimes it takes a little time to get the information for if there's a breaking news situation about what's happening. We always confirm information before putting it out there. That's the last thing that we want to do, especially in a breaking news situation, is to put out information that's not confirmed, because obviously, you get people calling and trying to tell you like this is what's happening on this particular street, and a lot of times people are wrong. So we really make sure that we have the information and the details confirmed, because it's we don't want to be that media outlet that's putting wrong information out there.
Great. So we've got about a few more minutes left. This is an interesting question we just received. Is there a different set of standards that a digital only news platform can get away with as far as language that is offensive or profane as deemed by the FCC? I don't know if anybody's up on that, but if anybody wants to take a swing.
Yeah, we would not post any content that is offensive or graphic. We are extremely careful on all media platforms. I mean, we don't want to do anything that could be offensive or, graphic. I don't know what the specific, I think there's a little bit more leeway, but not much. I mean, as a station, it's our choice on what to post and how to do it. We realize that, we don't want to offend anybody. So we're very careful to make sure that nothing is graphic and nothing is offensive to anyone. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is social media, and those comments is just people are constantly posting to our Facebook. We get a lot of responses. It's a challenge sometimes to try to keep an eye on that. We rely on other Facebook users to let us know when something is offensive or graphic, because sometimes people do put those in the comments. So we're trying to monitor the best that we can in those situations. People are always looking for attention that we find on social media. So we try to be really careful on all of that.
Yeah, obviously the tone is different online. So I'm actually a very good example of that. So the tone when I write in the blog is much more informal than it is when I write in my column, which is in the paper. And the column is much more informal than when I write a news story. But I'm not going to, say naughty words in any of them. So at that aspect, at least, the standards are roughly the same. Whether it's whose guidelines actually, I mean, we are considered publishers, right? So we take responsibility for what we print, unlike the Facebook and Googles who've managed to somehow get all the advertising revenue and none of the responsibility. So that is an aspect. But it is a little less obvious than it was in the old.
Yeah. Let's take one more question here, and this would help a lot of us struggling PR people in the COVID age. Have you folks been to an event that would have been indoors but had to be moved outdoors? And how did the organization make it look great but still professional outdoors? Have you seen any good examples of businesses that have taken stuff outside that they would normally have inside, or trying to get COVID? You think of any examples?
I can tell you that we've been invited to indoor events, and I've had to tell the organizers, we're not doing indoor events, and then they call back and say, well, we're going to move it outdoors for you. So yeah, it's a challenge. We have had to rely on people to provide us photos and or video. I mean, we've asked people to take cell phone video, and we can use that for our news stories. I mean, the quality of phones today, are more than acceptable. So what we tended to do was just, people would come outside, either have a podium, or we would set up a mic stand, and people would, do the talking for their event at the podium or our mic stand. And then we may need to ask them to provide some photos or video to help sustain that, especially if there's something specific indoors. But we can always make it work. I mean, that's the one thing that we found out over the past year. Sometimes it doesn't look like it's slick or as good as we normally did before pre-COVID, but it's more about getting the information out for people. And, you know, our technology, we have ways to make anything look good these days.
Super. David Brooks?
I haven't been to very many at all, so this isn't personal experience, but basically any organization, anything like that, you should be setting it up for people who are there and not for the media coverage. And if you set it up so that it works for the people who are there, the actual audience you want, it'll also work for media coverage. So it's the ones that don't work are the ones that say, we'll do this goofy, weird thing because we think it'll look really good on TV, or you know, the monitor will come and take a photograph. Those don't work.
Yeah, good points.
And the only thing I would add, Seth, is, you know, I have talked through some, you know, making things work outdoors, you know, before the event, the day before the event, just talking things through. But David's right, you know, don't worry about how it's going to look outside, because we can, you know, through the editing process, we'll make sure that it looks good.
Great. Well, guys, we've reached our hour here and it flew by as it always does. I want to thank again, David Sakowich and David Brooks. We really appreciate it. You guys are two pros, pillars of the New Hampshire media world, and we're really glad to have you with us. I hope we see you again at a future session. Laura, thank you to you and the Natke Loeb School for once again for hosting us. We hope to see you in person again, maybe this year.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you to the attendees, Seth and Yankee PRSA, and to Dave Sakowich and David Brooks. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that folks will join both Yankee chapter and the Loeb School for future events. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.